Hey everyone, calling all investors. Today is Tuesday. You know what that time is? It is live with Caeli time, and we are here every Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. or 1:30 p.m. Pacific. And we are here to talk about all things real estate investors. As you have any questions, for those who are just rolling in, if you've never been to one of these, this is all about collaboration. So we want to hear from you. Caeli wants to hear your questions. You can put those questions into the chat. You can put those questions into the Q&A. You can raise your virtual hand or just shake your hand around on video, whatever you want to do, and we will call you out and let you do your thing and find out more information. We are following up today. Today is part 2. We are learning about the important property review mistakes. If you missed last week's episode, do not fret. It's on replay on the community or on the podcast, wherever you get those delivered to you at. You can catch up. And we're going to go through the rest of what Caeli left on the table from last week. But before we do that, in the emails, we had sent out a link to download your copy of the property management checklist. So we're going to do a quick poll because Caeli loves polls. Caeli, it's your favorite time. So we're going to go ahead and launch this poll. And the poll says, have you downloaded your property management checklist? We had Caeli. What do you think? How many downloads do you think we had of the property management checklist in the last week?
I think a ton.
A ton? Yeah, well, you're pretty darn close. We had almost 200 people download. That is not to mention other places, but just in the emails that we sent out. And the reason why I'm asking is because if you're on this call and you haven't downloaded your property management checklist, I'm going to put it up here in the chat. So you can go ahead and download that because Caeli, I think you said you're going to go over this in today's call.
I am. I'm going to share screen. So even if you haven't downloaded it, guys, it's there available for you in the community, but you'll see it on my screen here shortly. Thank you, Larry Bailey.
You are welcome. Take us away, Caeli.
I'll do it. Okay, guys, thanks for being here with me. I'm going to give it just another second. I think there was a link issue this morning with Zoom. I saw some emails. So I'm just going to kind of hear myself talk for a second. In fact, why don't I take a minute and did anybody have any follow-up questions? I'm not going to abbreviate or go back over last week. You guys have access to that, so feel free to go back and rewatch part 1. This is investor due diligence of your investment properties. But did anybody have any top of mind stuff that came up from last week or anything that's rattling in your brain right now? As I give it just another minute or so to see if we get any other stragglers coming in for this week's event. Anybody have anything that you want to quickly touch on before I get going?
There are no questions coming in and no Q&A and no chats, Caeli. Everybody's being quiet as a mouse.
Okay, all right, then I am just going to go for it. Just as a reminder, everybody, next week, next Tuesday and the Tuesday after, I think it is the 2nd and the 9th,
Mm-hmm.
Those will be pre-recorded live with Caeli's. We're going to release them either the night before or early the morning of. And I'm going to be going over certified power buyer, just kind of an abbreviated idea of what you can expect for that one-on-one with me. This is the CPB, certified power buyer, that some of our investors have elected to take advantage of. It is a free service that we provide for our investors that really does a deep dive into strategy and education, optimization of qualifications as they change, as you evolve as real estate investors. It's pretty cool stuff. It's a series of 3, 4, even 5 calls, just depending on how many rabbit holes we go down. And it's very specifically and strategically based on you and your goals and your qualifications. So it's kind of cool. I'm going to give you guys just an overview of what to expect in that. So any of you that are on our calls during the week here that have done this with me, it's going to be very familiar. So I don't know if it's necessary for you to go and watch those recordings. But for everybody else that hasn't done it, check it out. It's cool and it's free. Okay, me one-on-one, and it's free. You have to have an application in with real-time updated documents, right? Pay stubs, you don't actually have to be active in a transaction, but we do need to know that you're serious at some point about getting financing and using Ridge. That's the requirement. Okay, any questions come up when I was blathering about that, Lair?
Your delay tactics were unsuccessful. Nobody has any questions still.
All right, let's do this, people. Okay, so before I share screen, let me just kind of, I think, and if any of this is redundant, sorry. I think that we got through the overall figures of our property and kind of getting into, what are the rents, making sure you know the taxes, the insurance, the purchase price. I highlighted here vacancy and maintenance, and I don't remember if we talked about it. So if we did, I apologize. I'm just going to kind of quickly go over it again. And everybody's got kind of a different slant on vacancy and maintenance. Some people will say 5%, 3%, 10% for vacancy and maintenance when they're figuring out their numbers and what their rate of return is going to be. I myself have kind of been middle of the road. I think that you need to account for whether it's new construction. You want to understand what the property manager, if you're property managing yourself, perhaps, which I think everybody should do at least once. I'm not going to say I recommend that as a long-term line of work. I know I couldn't do it, but depending on a variety of variables, it really should dictate what you're using for vacancy and maintenance. Like I said, if it's new construction and your property management company has a vacancy rate of 2%, then I think you can back that off a little bit in your numbers. If it's an older home that hasn't had a lot of upgrades at this point, then increase it. So I guess common sense there is probably what I'm trying to say. Otherwise 5, 7, 8, 9, 10% is what most people are going to use for vacancy maintenance. And then lastly, again, I apologize if we went over this, make sure that when you're running your numbers that you have accounted for any HOA. Sometimes we've gotten close to the closing table, and for whatever reason, it didn't come up on our end, and the investor didn't know about it, that there was an HOA in the property. And it wasn't just $20 a year or something, it was more substantial. So make sure you understand what the HOA is, if there is an HOA, what the amount is, what does it cover, all of that stuff. And then if utilities are your responsibility, typically not, but I've seen it. So just make sure you know the answers to those questions. So without further ado, let's get into the new stuff, property management. We have talked about this before on our live with me and gone over the property management checklist, which is what we'll look at next, but I want to just get into a few bullet points. So the turnkey, if you're working with a turnkey, a lot of times they're going to have a property management in-house that's part of their services, it's part of their business. And then other times they're going to be a subset, or it's a different outsourced property management that they have a close working relationship with. Regardless, I think that it's very important for investors to vet their own. I really think that whether you're going to be using an in-house or the referral that the turnkey has given you, I think that you should have a conversation, do your Google search, and find property managers. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be in the exact space that you're in. If you can find a property manager that has a national presence, there's a few of them, that might be a good place to have a Q&A, just to get an understanding or a different of lens between the two, see how close or similar or not the answers are. What else did I have on this list?
Caeli, we did have one question come up, and I think it was just going back to your HOA comment. And so this is from Chris. And Chris, thank you very much for the comments over the last few times we've been together. Great content to add. So thank you for being collaborative. Chris said, I learned a lesson to read the HOA covenants, Caeli. I think you might have mentioned this maybe even last year, because some HOAs actually have severe restrictions on rentals.
They do, from the color of the exterior to whether you can make it a short-term rental, midterm rental, right? All of that stuff. It's a very good point. CC&Rs is what we call it here. Covenants, something, and restrictions. What is it, Larry? I should know that.
Geez. That one, CC&Rs, I'm going to pass. I like covenant restrictions, the C part, Caeli, covenant, Caeli, and restrictions.
Done. Okay. But yeah, good point, Chris. You want to be looking at that stuff. We will always, just since we're talking about this, on the lending side, we're always, if it's a condo, we're always going to request a condo certification or an HOA, homeowners association certification, that tells us whether the condo is warrantable or not warrantable. A non-warrantable condo might mean that it's in litigation, or that the HOA is in delinquency by a certain percentage, or that more than 50% of the occupants are investor owned, or made that more than one one individual owns more than 10% of the entire project, those kinds of things. And it will greatly dictate what kind of terms you can get. If it's non-warrantable condo, you're looking at non-QM products, and those are different rates and terms. So yeah, okay, rabbit hole. So let's see. So the rental, within the property manager, I want you guys to be asking, and this won't be on our list that we're going to look at here in a second. I want you to be asking if they have a scoring system, a rentability scoring system for the property. Many of them will. How would they rate the property in terms of rentability? If it's a low number, there could be some extended period of time of vacancy or until it's getting rented. It may not be a deal breaker, but ask that question, and if they have an answer. And then the other thing too, very, very important, you guys need, and I think this might be on the checklist, you guys personally need to understand the tenant landlord laws and the eviction laws per the state or city, really. It could change from city to city. Very, very important that you know that going into it. You know, I used to tend to focus on areas like markets when I would be deciding which market that I wanted to invest in next or more or whatever, largely based on tenant landlord laws. There are certain states that are extremely favoring the tenant, and in which case, if they don't pay rent, the laws are going to favor the tenant, and it could be very difficult and costly to vacate a tenant, etc. You need to know what those laws are, and not that you have to have them memorized, but you should at least have a good understanding of what is involved in evicting a tenant and the cost and the process, etc. But you should be asking the property management as one of the questions. I'll get there in a minute. And if they don't know it, they can't rattle it off like it's their ABCs. I would have some concern with that. They should know that better than anybody. And then finally, and I don't remember if I mentioned this last week either, and it certainly isn't mandatory, but whenever it's possible, you guys, I think that taking a trip, sight unseen is very, very common. I've done it lots and lots and lots of times myself. But if it's possible, if it's feasible to take a weekend and go tour the areas or the properties that the turnkey has for sale, I just think that there's something about, having your eyes on it, meeting the person that you're going to be working with face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and getting a feel for that relationship. There's something to be said. And lastly, remember that for any of you that are electing that real estate professional exemption within the IRS code for your tax advantages, that amount of time, if you left on a Friday and got home on a Sunday, whatever number of hours that is, 48 hours, whatever, that counts against your $750 annual. Okay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to get into that, but if you do, then it makes sense. Okay, let's go over this. Let's get out of that. Let's get my technology hat on, share screen.
While Caeli's doing that, for those that are just joining again, we are covering questions as follow-up and topics for follow-up that we had last week. And we're talking about the mistakes you have with property review. So as you have any questions, feel free to either use the chat or use the Q&A or raise your hand to take yourself off mute. And if you're watching this on replay, if you have any questions at all about what you're listening to, you can always call into 855-74-RIDGE or email to info@ridgelendinggroup.com. We did have one question, Caeli, if you want to take that now.
Yeah.
All right. So Katie asks, how does one best determine the full property management costs or a good percentage to apply when underwriting the deal? A lot of times, Katie's hearing 8 to 10%. But sometimes Katie feels that there might be other charges like taking 1 month's rent or charging for procuring materials or handling maintenance requests, etc. What's your feedback on that?
It's a very good point that Katie makes, and 100%. So when you hear that the property management fee, monthly fee for collecting the rent and doing all of those other busy work details is 8 to 10%. That's not going to include the re-up. So if it goes vacant and they have to, get the property re-rent ready and get a new tenant in there, there's going to be a percentage of that month's first rent that they're going to take. Sometimes they take the first month's rent, right? It can be expensive. So you really need to read the fine print within your contract with the property management. And we haven't even gotten into some of the other ticky-tack fees. And I'm going to cover some of that here, but it's an excellent point that 8 to 10% of the gross rents is not all they're going to be making. There are additional costs throughout the year, especially when they have to replace, or when a tenant vacates and they have to replace it with a new tenant. Those costs can go up exponentially. So the questions about vacancy rate, you can kind of see, you guys can see my screen, right, Larry?
You are good, Caeli.
Okay. So the questions about vacancy rate and the average length of lease, et cetera, are going to be really important to have answers to that will help define at least a little bit the answer to that question, Katia. So let's just kind of go through these one at a time. By no means, you guys, is this a complete list. There's more stuff, and maybe we'll get into it together. I want to hear from you guys about issues, not just about property management. Certainly, I want to hear about that too. But for anybody that's interested in sharing any of your due diligence successes or lessons, please, I think everybody's interested in some of the pitfalls or some of the wins that you've had over time when you're vetting properties. Okay, so current vacancy rate, what is it today, right? Well, and I don't think I have this on here. I think that you guys definitely want to add this. Oh no, it is down here. This should be at the top. How many homes does the property manager manage? Is it 5? Is it 3,000? And depending on the answer to that question, what does their staff look like? Okay, that definitely is not on here. Depending on how many homes, if they manage 3,000 homes, what does their staff look like? How many people do they have working for them? I should probably work that backwards and add that to this list. And when I update it, I'll update it on the community and kind of give you guys a feel for how many full-time employees and maybe part-time employees I think are appropriate based on every 1,000 doors that they manage. I'll try and get a formula for that and throw it in here. But okay, current vacancy rate, their average vacancy rate annually, right? What is that number? The higher the number, the worse. That is for you. We want that to be a low, low, low number. What is the average length of the lease? Is it 12 months? Is it 24 months? Obviously, the longer the term of lease, the better, so long as they have it in the contract that the rents are being appreciated. I am of the opinion, and I know there's exceptions to every rule. You guys hear me say that all the time. I think rents should be appreciating at a minimum. I don't care what market you're in, at a minimum of 3% a year. And certain markets might be at 5, maybe they're even more, but I think rents should be appreciating at 3%, 2 or 3% a year on a minimum basis. That's my opinion. Okay, average, and remember, if you guys have questions or comments, put them in there. Larry will interrupt me. Average turn time to get the property rented. What is that? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 2 months? You want to have that information for obvious reasons. I like to know what methods do they go through to vet the potential tenant. Do they get pay stubs? Are they requiring that they make 3 times the amount of the rent? What is the formula that they're using? Are they, do they do a background check, a credit report check? By what means are they doing this? Do they contact references? All of that stuff. I want to know how and by what means are they qualifying the renters, not just about their history, but what is their income, et cetera. I want to know those things. What technology are they using for tracking the revenue and costs? And do you have 24/7 real-time access? And does the renter? In today's day and age, right, where it's April of 2023, if the property management is still using, invoices via email and things of that nature, and they don't have highly sophisticated online portal, that would concern me. I'd be concerned with that. Technology should be huge, especially for the predominant group of renters, the age range, right? The 20 through 30 age range. Those guys want technology. And that I bet you makes a big difference to who they're going to rent from or continue to rent from.
Did have a question here, Caeli.
Yeah.
So kind of working it into this cost piece. I don't know if this is an easy question for now, if you want to bookmark it for later, but Eustace asks, when we're talking about the 8 to 10% factor before, You just asked the question, what's a reasonable rate of return when it comes to turnkey deals? Do you think that's now or do you think that's later?
No, I mean, there are variables, guys, that I think that could make this lower or higher, but I'd want to see 7-8% today. Have I gotten into deals that were lower than that? Sure. Have I gotten deals that were higher than that? Absolutely. The higher the better, obviously, but I wouldn't turn my nose up at anything 5% or higher. Below 5, probably not, unless if it's still cash flowing and it's got massive upside appreciation or whatever variables that you want to layer in there. For me, I would say nothing less than 5, and there better be some really good compensating factors. But 8 to 10, 7, 8, 9, 10, and still, within the lower end of that spectrum, I'd want some other compensating factors.
And are you thinking, Jag just asked the question, Jag just got here. So is that 7 to 8% cash on cash, or are you talking about something different?
Just the rate of return when we're talking about the expense, the hard expenses, and you can do annually or monthly. I mean, however you want to break that down, that's the division that I'm doing. Okay, so technology, how are they marketing these properties? Is it online? Is there a sign in the yard simply that says, hey, for rent? What else are they doing? How else are they, social media presence? I want to know exactly what they're doing to get tenants in there. Do they have a pool that they market to, etc. This one's a big one for me, and I always am very interested to hear what they have to say about this. So when they get tenant calls, and they're going to get tenant calls, whatever it may be, this is broken or that needs repair, there's a light bulb out or whatever it is, how are they managing that? My ideal is to have a property management that is using some heads up all that has some common sense, that can walk the tenant through via the phone what the easy fix might be. Because a lot of times, I would say maybe more than half the time, if you get a tenant call, the dumb example that I give is a disposal. The disposal is not working, it's broken, okay? Well, if the property management gets a call from a tenant for whatever the repair is and automatically sends out one of its handymen, right? There's going to be a cost for that, a cost to you for that. Versus if they do have common sense, they're going to try and walk the tenant through and say, hey, have you pushed the red button on the bottom of that big round black sphere underneath your sink? Let's try that first. Let's go through the troubleshooting quickly over the phone and see if we can mitigate any need to come out and replace or actually work on. So ask those questions. Where are I? Okay, releasing fees. So this kind of plays into, Katie, your question. What will they charge? Is it going to be a percentage of the gross rents? And if so, what's the percent? You want to factor that stuff in. Does their agreement include exclusive right to sell? This is another big one that you want to be looking for some fine print, that if it does, that means that there are real estate agents on staff of the property management company, and that if you just blindly sign that agreement and when you go to sell, you have given them the exclusive right to sell that property, and their commission is going to be paid. So make sure that you know if that's the case, and if that's okay with you, fine. The exclusive right to sell. I don't know anymore that that's used as much, exclusive right to sell, than I know it used to be a bigger deal with real estate agents where they would want the exclusive right to sell, and I think anymore it's probably not as popular a thing, but I'd want to know. There we go again, landlord and tenant laws. We want to know what that is. Here's a good one. You guys are going to be the one that sets the bar for this, okay? Do I want my property manager calling me and waiting for my approval on a $20 light cover or $10 light cover or whatever it may be? No, don't bother me. So I'm going to probably set it up on the onset of the front end. You have a $100 threshold. Anything that comes up between $0 and $100 that has to be repaired, you have my permission or authority to go ahead and take care of it without having to involve me. Anything over that, then yes, I want to be a part of that conversation and discuss where, what the cost is, Are there alternatives? Are there cheaper methods? Da, 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 right? How long have they been in business? That speaks for itself. We already talked about how many they manage, and then the employees goes hand in hand with that. So anybody else have anything else about property management that they wish they knew that might not be on this list, that they found out later that it would have prevented X, Y, and Z? Anybody, anything? I know you guys got something.
For those that
Somebody's
have
got something.
any want to interact and want to mention anything again, if you want to go ahead and raise your virtual hand on Zoom, I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute so you can join the conversation. Or if you're not in a spot where you can do that, you can go ahead and type in and I will read what you type. Katia is asking, so let's go ahead and ask to unmute. Katia, you should be able to unmute now if you like.
Hi, can you hear me?
You're good.
Hi, Miss Katia.
Hi, hello, Caeli. Hi, Larry.
Hello.
And everyone else. So just building up on my question before, and I see that Chris had answered it. I'm basically trying to minimize risk and cost when it comes to property management. I've heard more nightmare stories than positive stories. And I am with Caeli in the sense that I would like for my first deal to, or the first few anyway, to manage as much as possible and learn so that I can be, dangerous down the line and hiring someone from soup to nuts to do everything. But I'm just wondering, are there components of the property management process that people have outsourced successfully? Like if they've kind of modularized it and sliced and diced it. So I'm thinking like the marketing, separating that from, and the screening and separating that from the actual ongoing management and repair and maintenance of the property. And even in that case, I don't know if there's a way to even divide that and just like have your handy person who you'd call randomly and then have someone who's more of like a general contractor for the big time stuff. But just curious to know how people have kind of maybe sliced and diced it if they've outsourced components rather than having someone handle everything from A to Z.
I think it's a valid question. I really want to hear from you guys. If anybody has any feedback here, please enlighten us. My instinct says, however, Katie, is that if you have a property management where you need to do that, I think something's wrong. I think that the property management is wrong. I think you want to be able to rely on your property manager to do all of those things as efficiently and cost effectively as possible. And I think that if you had to parse it out and subdivide it into those different categories, I think you're going to end up paying more. But I would be very interested if anybody has any experience with that. Has anyone done it that way where, let's say the property manager simply collects the rents? I mean, I don't know what else they would do if we're going to have a contractor doing some of this over here and then somebody else marketing for renters. Anybody got anything?
Nothing coming through in chat so far. Caeli, that's fairly unusual, right? I mean, normally if you're doing it, it's either all or you're acting as a manager and you're acting as the coordinator.
Yeah, I've never heard of it being done that way. That's not to say that it hasn't, or there aren't some gains or positives to it. Again, Katie, I think that it's going to cost you more to do it that way because you're kind
of paying for you're like paying for full service, but you're like taking a lot of that on yourself. That wouldn't seem in the best interest, would it be, Caeli?
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing too, Katie, is that whether you don't want to micromanage, of course, but if you did it that way, then you are going to have to, at least in some small way, manage each one of those different divisions of work and support of the property. So I don't see a scenario where that is superior to having a kick-ass property manager. And by the way, I don't know that anything, and I'm going to include cash flow in this statement, I don't know that anything takes more precedent or more importance over the right property manager. I mean, it is at least tied for the number one most important thing in any successful real estate venture is the property manager. And kind of going back real quickly, I think we've got some other questions, so I'll shut up in a second. But I did it early. I was young and ambitious and just as dumb as they come. But you know, I wanted to see what it was all about. I wanted to have the information, and so I'm glad that I did it. But property management is no small thing. It takes a lot of organization and resource and time to be a property manager. It's not easy work, and that is not where my skill sets, I think, did well for me. But I think that it's wise for each of you to, if you can, if the opportunity is available to you and you have a property close enough to you, and maybe even if it's not next door or in your same area, maybe you still try to do it for a month or two before you have your property manager in the wings getting ready to take over. But just to have the experience, I think is useful. Anyway, questions, Larry?
Yeah, we've got a couple of folks. Jag's going to come on. Jag, you go ahead, and I've asked you to unmute. And so if you want to pick up.
Hi, yeah, hi, Caeli.
Hi, Jag.
I found one of the things that were invaluable. I'm sorry if I'm repeating something you said since I joined late, apologies. But one of the things I found really useful is to have one point person at the property management company that can handle everything for you. So they are the point person to talk about any maintenance issues, any leasing issues, billing questions. They handle everything like an account person. Otherwise, you get passed around and it's a nightmare. Nobody takes any accountability, and I'm having that experience right now on one of my properties. So just wanted to share. I don't know what you think.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you for that share. I think that'll go a long way. And it was not in anything that we talked about. I'm gonna have to add that to the list. 100%. You need one point of contact in almost any relationship, even lending. I'll kind of compare that to finance. While we do our best to have your one point of contact within the loan structure that we do, it's not entirely feasible. You'll have one dedicated loan specialist, but then you'll also have a loan processor, and those are two different people. And even then, with just two, it's going to be a lot because there's a lot of different moving parts and people involved in. So if you can get in the property management just one point of contact, 100% is going to really, I think, save you a lot of time and brain damage later, as Jag was alluding to. It's not going to be pleasant to have to call and speak to somebody new every single time about the same situation or issue or new one or what have you. I think that's a great point, Jag. Thank you for sharing.
Caeli, on that topic, we did have a question from TS. I mean, when you get in a situation like that, what have you found the best way to terminate a property management company? Like, what's your go-to action? What do you do?
Well, first, I would say you want to have your replacement, right? You don't want to make any changes or decisions until you have somebody waiting to take over, and obviously assuming that you've already vetted them and gone through your checklist of questions, starting with what you really didn't like about the old and what you're expecting to improve with the new. And then otherwise, unless I'm maybe missing the question, I would pick up the phone and call them and say, you're fired. I no longer want to receive your services.
So direct.
Thank you.
You're so direct.
I got that from you, Larry.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would probably call. And if you don't want to do that, because I would automatically follow up with an email as well so that it was in writing. But I would call and then follow up with an email. And if you didn't want to call and you didn't have time to get someone on the phone or whatever, an email is fine. Make sure you put a read receipt or delivery receipt on there, that notification was given. And check your contract, right? There may be, yeah, there may be something. That's a good point, Jag. I'll mention that. You guys are probably seeing the chat too. There may be something in the contract that says you got to give them 30 days advance notice. So you want to be aware of what you signed, and what your options are if there's any restriction to what you can and can't do. And then Jag is saying any outstanding. Larry, will you read that to me?
Yeah. So basically, naturally, listen, when you have a contractor, there are things in there, Caeli, like what Caeli's talking about. And part of what your property manager is doing, they might have access to tenant records. They might have account balances on their account. there might be money in transition. Like, you're not just going to go like reach out on Monday morning and go, hey, dude, you're fired. You got to plan for this thing. And I think that's really what you're driving at, right, Caeli?
Well, I think Jag actually answered the question better than I did. Yes. Yeah. My version was just how do you tell them goodbye? But yes, you have to account for all that stuff. That was a little short-sighted of me. Yeah, you want to make sure that you are protecting your investment, the actual cash on hand, and keeping an eye on that. If the technology is good, that we talked about earlier, and everything is outlined and documented, that you have 24/7 real-time access, you should know about any accounts payable or receivable in real time. So there shouldn't be too much of a question between, let's say, the day that you want to end the relationship and what might be coming back, or what might be due, or what might be needed to pay for X, Y, and Z. There shouldn't be too much outstanding there, but you want to get those ducks in a row before you make any decisions.
And listen, I know we, our goal here is to get some information out. We've got one more question coming in, Chris. If you want to go ahead and hit the unmute, you want to share to the conversation, feel free.
Yeah, hi everyone, thanks.
Hey, Chris.
So I had a question, and I also had a couple comments, but the question first is, when is it worth it to start with property management? So I have 3 rentals. I gross about $88,000 a year in rent, and I bring in a net operating income, which isn't necessarily cash flow, but net is $55,000. Now, to pay 10% of gross rent to manage my stabilized rentals doesn't seem worth it, especially going back to Kadia's question. I want to choose my tenants. I'm really, really picky on tenants. And so I've actually gone through kind of some of what you guys were talking about. Well, this doesn't seem like it would be worth paying for because the property management company only doing 50% of their job, right, for what you're paying them for. And I actually was looking and talking to property management companies to see if they would work with me on handling the day-to-day, and I would do the tenant, screening process. And none of them would do it because they have a little bit of a reverse or inverse relationship with your money in that regard, because they get paid to place people. So
Yeah.
their impetus is not to keep people there over a long period of time. The more they get paid more if they're placing a new person every year, essentially. And so when I said, hey, can I pay you to do the management of it, to do maintenance, to take phone calls, all that stuff, not a single one was interested in doing that.
Another excellent point. Let's unpack this piece by piece. So, the fact that a property management might be incentivized to turn these tenants every year, I think there's probably some truth to that. However, for the sophisticated investor, hopefully everybody on this call, when you're asking those questions of your property management company, and they know that they're dealing with savvy investors, I mean, you got to get a feel for this. What is their average length of lease, right? Ideally, you want it to be at least 2 years. And if you know that they're turning, have that conversation, right? Is there some truth to just maybe play novice and say, is part of the reason that it's every year so that property management can afford to send their kids to college, or however you want to phrase it. But I think that if you find the right property manager, and that's why it's such an important piece, I'm not sure that is their objective or their agenda. I think that a good property manager wants to keep the tenants in, and they're making it up because they're super efficient, and they have. I'm going to use Memphis Invest. I don't know who is aware of that family, the Clothiers. They're in Tennessee. I think they're in Texas now. I think they go by another name. It's not Memphis Invest anymore. It's I'm spacing. It doesn't matter. But they've spent years and years and years fine-tuning their processes, and to the point that they are so rigorously defined. I mean, down to the minute detail. That they can overcharge in some cases for their properties because there's never any issues. They have figured it out down to that science, so that from property management to the utilities used, to the upgrades and the flooring and the cupboards and the appliances, and everything is absolutely perfected, so that the amount of issues that happen after you close is down to nothing. And they keep all of that property management, and they keep their investors, their tenants in place. So aside from that, let's go back to the other part that Chris was mentioning, and why self-managed may be of use. I would say that for me, Chris, do you, I don't know if you're still unmuted. Do you have a full-time job? Or is this part of your full-time employment?
Chris, let me go ahead, and I've asked you to unmute again if you want to get back on the line.
I don't have the power to unmute myself. Larry has to let me.
I do every time.
I am kind of in the middle. So I'm a software engineer. I've been a software engineer for 20 years, and I've just started up a consulting company. And so at the moment, I am about part-time employed by myself, right? Employing myself. And so it's giving me an opportunity to pursue real estate a little bit more seriously at this point. But previously, for the past 3 years, as I picked up investment properties, I was full-time employed, yes.
So let me ask you a question then. Being full-time employed without, the flexibility of picking and choosing, and you have 3 properties, I think I heard you say, and it sounds like they're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And maybe this has to do with your own vetting and how selective you are or were with the tenant. But you were able to manage that without any issues, right? The needs of the tenant and all the other things that come along with that. It wasn't a problem.
So when I purchased one of the properties, it had a tenant in place, and that tenant was hugely problematic. And I ended up paying that tenant to leave and learned some really good lessons in trying to work with someone who kind of, knows the system, is a renter, really knows the system well, and started to threaten to sue me and all that sort of thing. So I noped out and said, I will give you $1,500 to leave in 2 weeks. And she did. Other than that, though, once I removed that tenant from the situation, the properties that I have are all very, very nice. And the tenants I pick are all really the best tenants you could ask for that type of property. And so once they've stabilized each of them, 0 problems at all. I have an automated payment system. They get their, rent gets deducted every month automatically. If there's a maintenance problem, like a fence panel came loose, they, send me a message to the system, and I'll say, oh yeah, I'll be over on Thursday, and I'll just, put a screw in there or something like that. So it hasn't been, finding tenants is time consuming. I'll spend probably 40 hours screening tenants per unit. But once I get a good tenant in there, most of my tenants have stayed, a year plus, and it's been no drama. So it's kind of like, oh man, when does paying the 8 to 10% become worth it? Is it when I have more units and I couldn't possibly physically keep up with it? Is it when I'm making enough money, it's not worth my time anymore? I'm trying to figure that out still.
I think it's a combination of both of those things. And I think that for most of us, the availability of time to vet the tenants, and I think that just getting through a little bit of this and then opening it up to, I think everybody, I know I want to hear what, if you don't mind, Chris, what you go through to select and vet these tenants, and we'll close with that. But I think the answer to your question is that, yeah, it has to do with value of time and money, right? At some point. So I had enough properties that, and my full-time job was extremely demanding, and there's no way I could have done it on my own. No way. I absolutely had to have that property management. From the sounds of it, that's not true for you. You've got 3 properties, and I think that because you've had that time to vet for yourself, you've done such a good job of vetting the tenant, and you don't have those extra issues. I agree with you. Why would you pay?
Right.
Do they know that you're the owner of the property?
They do, and You know, I kind of had qualms about, um, you know, that much disclosure that I'm the owner and property manager essentially. But it has turned out well where the people who have gotten renting, and even ex-tenants now really appreciate how well they have been treated and the quality of the properties. That if they have a problem, if their garbage disposal breaks, which actually did happen to me one time, and it was leaking into the floor below it, and it's like, okay, well, obviously that has to be fixed like immediately. Plumber came out like within 45 minutes. And so really them knowing that I am the owner and that I really put their needs first has made a big difference to how people have treated those properties. So I've had zero problems with people. Even they don't even leave a mess when they leave. Like I haven't even had to really clean very much when they.
That's
Yeah.
nice. So here's what I would say about that, you guys. I think that it's worked out really well for Chris. I would not tell if I'm going to do the property management or take one and go ahead and property manage myself. I do not want them to know that I'm the owner. And I think that you can probably come up with the same result if you treat them in the same manner. I don't think they need to know that you're the owner. And the reason that I would avoid sharing that is that, life is life and it's messy. If they know that you're the owner and you're the one that has the authority to delay rent or omit or negotiate whatever, it becomes a lot more personal. And I would separate those two things. And for me, I don't want to say I'm a bleeding heart, but at the same time, I want to have that separation so that if the continued sob story for why they can't pay on time or why they can't, whatever it is, I don't want to be the one. I can be the heavy because I'm removed. I'm just the property manager, right? It's not my money. It's so I would keep that separate. I think it's worked out well for Chris in his case, but I think that you can still reserve that same service and
Sure.
sense
Yeah.
of urgency, et cetera.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm a bit of a bleeding heart as well. And luckily, I mean, the first that tenant I had who was in place when I purchased the property, very manipulative, very abusive, bully, texted me like 500 times a day for several months. Terrible, really terrible. But the other tenants that I've gotten in place now are wonderful, and I never hear from them. But
Awesome.
yeah. So my tenant screening process, I actually go through Avail, which is avail.co, I think is the website.
Oh, this is a website. Okay. Can you spell it? Could you put it in the chat, Chris?
Yeah. And what it is, it's a property management software that realtor.com developed.
Okay.
And let me find the URL. I know I have it open somewhere. Yeah, it's avail.co. And so what they do is they do an online application that does a criminal background check, a credit check, a international warrants check, a sex offender registry check.
Sweet.
And it tries to automate getting references from your employer, from your current or previous landlord, and it packages that all up and sends it to you. And what I do, as well as like income, and allows you to upload like W-2s or pay stubs, any documentation you need.
Secure portal.
What I do is they put in the contact information for their current landlord, for their current manager or their employer. I call, and I would say that about 75% of the time when I call, and when a tenant looks like a really good, match for the references and for credit and for income, I call their current landlord, and it's not their landlord number that they give me. I call their employer; it's not really their employer. And so I've been really careful on who I will let in the door, because there's a lot of people who are just lying on applications to get somewhere to live. They know that I'm in Wisconsin. It is a fairly neutral state, but it takes 3 to 4 months to evict someone. So they know if they can get in the door, get the security deposit, they'll get 3 to 4 months of free rent out of it while I evict them. And so I'm not interested in doing that. So I'm very vigilant. Vigilant? That's not a real word. Diligent.
Vigilant. Vigilant. That's
Vigilant.
a combination of vigilant and diligence.
Exactly. I just crafted a new word. And if anything doesn't seem legitimate, like if they give me a phone number to someone who they say is their landlord, and I say, how much is their rent? And that landlord or that property manager doesn't know, you're not a landlord.
Hello,
Or,
yeah.
I mean, come on. So that's really what I've been doing, and so far that has been really successful.
Excellent, excellent. I think this is so great. Chris, I owe you something for this. I think we
Sure.
gotta wrap it up though, because we're over time. I think the takeaway there for me is the software, guys. Anybody that's going to try and do this on your own, or maybe just simulate it on your own, I think it's a great idea. Check out that software. But the takeaway for me is that if you get all of this data, you have to actually call the references,
Right.
call the employer. Right? You can't just take it at face value that they submitted something and there's a name and a number on there. You actually have to take the extra steps and get the information. So, Chris, you're a stud. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Guys, we're out of time. If there's follow-up, get them to us in info. Hey, Larry, why don't you wrap it up for us?
You got it,
Thank you.
Charlie.
Thanks, Larry.
You're already, I know what's going on. You're already on the avail.co. Chris, thanks for that share. And if anybody's looking for what we're talking about, avail.co, avail.co, check out the website. It says from the makersofrealtor.com. So probably has some good stuff in there. Thanks, Chris, very much for that referral. Any questions from today's episode, you can always call 855-74-RIDGE. You can email to info@ridgelendinggroup.com. Make sure if you're listening to the replay, we'll make sure we'll put all the links that we got from today's show in there, including the property management checklist. And don't forget, next week, Caeli is going to have we're going to drop some episodes on May 2nd and May 9th. So look for the next live show on May 16th.
And I'm trying to get that appraiser, guys. I haven't identified that person yet, but I have time. And my intention is to have an actual appraiser on that has non-owner occupied investment experience and can really walk us through the inner workings of appraising, evaluating our properties.
You go for another week, Caeli. As always, awesome time. Today's a lot of great content. So thanks everybody for contributing. I know you love people when we collaborate.
Yeah, thanks guys for being here. I'll see you soon.